Hello, everybody, and it's fantastic to be here at the Cardano Summit here in Dubai. So the topic of this discussion today should be hopefully self-explanatory, but I think it's important to pull out some of those individual words. The first is community, which is really the reason we're all here and the reason that Cardano has managed to grow to what it's become today. The second is about participation. How are people contributing? How can people contribute? And last, but very definitely not least in the Age of Voltaire, it's about governance. How do we provide those frameworks, those mechanisms to actually enable and truly empower the potential that we've seen growing in this community for the entire existence of the project, but particularly over the last few years. So joining me, I have a number of my colleagues here. Ben O'Hanlon, many of you will know, he's the Community Chapter Director Lead for IOG and has worked within the community for about 5 years now. We have Danny Rebar, who is one of the faces and one of the drivers behind Project Catalyst, the innovation fund. And last but not least, we have Jack Briggs, who's a member of the Intersect bootstrapping team, who's helping set up that new member-based organization. So let's start with you, Ben. As I said, you've been working within the ecosystem for around 5 years. You've seen a lot of change and a lot of growth during that time. Perhaps you can just outline a little bit about how you have seen the change in how the community participates and contributes.
Yeah, I think in the 5 years I've been working in the ecosystem, the origin story really starts with stake pool operators. I began working with them during incentivized testnet. And what's really fascinating is, you start off with people in the community who are sharing the vision and the purpose of Cardano. And at that time, they're focused on stake pools. But as functionality comes online, like smart contracts, the age of DeFi, it's the role switching that is the takeaway that I'm sharing with you, is that people aren't static, These ecosystems are dynamic, and the people within them are evolving, and they take different roles, wear different hats. So a good example of that is I was seeing stake pool operators who are really business operators, developing tooling infrastructure, getting into NFTs. And so, the roles and the opportunities are exponential, and I think that's why I'm still here. I find it really interesting to see that happening.
And Danny, you've obviously been involved with Project Catalyst from the very early days. I'm sure many people are familiar with Project Catalyst, but perhaps give us a little bit of a contextual story about where Catalyst started and where it's been moving towards.
Yeah, absolutely. So it's been now, we just recently celebrated a 3rd birthday in September, I think in the middle of September. So happy belated birthday to Project Catalyst. And it started really with early 50 pioneers in a focus group, which was supposed to be of people just 25, but there was such an overwhelming interest early on about the governance and decision-making and community participation. There was really an amazing group of individuals that really jump-started the journey that now we are 3 years later, just heading into the Fund 11, and have funded now close to 1,300 projects, distributed or allocated almost $60 million worth of value in ADA across the ecosystem that really helps power all the great, amazing ideas that people are trying to turbocharge the ecosystem at large. So really it's the one of the world's largest blockchain-based grants ecosystem that anyone can participate in.
And Jack, Intersect is probably the newest addition to the participatory family, as it were.
Yeah.
Tell us a little bit more about Intersect and what you're trying to achieve there.
Yeah, so Intersect launched in July this year. So it's been in existence for about 12 weeks or so, and we've already got about 700 members already, despite being only 12 weeks old. And I think what Intersect is really trying to do is position Cardano for the future in a distributed way, right? So how do we develop Cardano with governance, but also the actual work to maintain the code bases, and the 25 or so code bases are migrating to Intersect later this month. So the proof's in the pudding with that. And given the 700 members or so today, they're all participating, or many of them are participating in committees and working groups. So that's super exciting. We've got about 4 or 5 committees that have been stood up by members so far. I'll quickly rattle those off. There's the Open Source Committee, there's the Technical Steering Committee, the Parameter Committee, the Membership and Community Committee, and the Civics Committee, importantly the Civics one. So we've got, that's just now, that's just 2023, and 2024 onwards is going to be super exciting. More committees, more working groups. Working groups are quite interesting because they bring non-members of Intersect into the Cardano space. They could be even outside of blockchain. So we're opening up a whole new level of perspectives coming into the industry and into the ecosystem.
And Ben, one of the other things we have seen, obviously Intersect is a more sort of formal member-based organization, but one of the things we have seen also evolve during the sort of the growth of Cardano is a more informal framework of guilds and associations and alliances within that. Perhaps you can tell me a little bit about some of the people that you've been speaking to over the last couple of years who are trying to drive that from a truly grassroots level.
I mean, you and me have talked privately about the people in Cardano who's got more experience than us in building communities, and touching on what you were saying about perspectives. What's been really great is to see when people move from their own perceptions, working together to get a shared perspective, because that's really where the leverage comes from. I've seen that happening within the NFT communities, you know, leading SPOs like Adam Deem, Jip Drops, Ape Society, you know, and they're all working with each other, and I think that's really exciting to see that participation, you know, being driven horizontally and bottom up, right? So it's, I think it's one of the key ingredients that you need in these ecosystems, that they're community-driven and community-led.
And Danny, we've seen, you know, when it comes to participation, obviously we've seen almost an entirely new sub-community within Catalyst itself, within the wider Cardano ecosystem. Tell me a little bit about how, during the course of Catalyst, you've been trying to encourage greater participation in the process.
It's challenging, but a very rewarding process, right? I think I learned that from Ben early on. It's Cardano is a very complex organic ecosystem, and it's a community of communities. There's a lot of different pockets. People are looking at it through different perspectives. They like different tools, different ways how they communicate. And I think tuning to that has been, you know, one of the most growing experiences in trying to figure out, like, how do you actually talk to different groups within the ecosystem, respecting in their language, in their space, how they want to be approached, and in the way they want to be also treated. Because, you know, Cardano is extremely complex, and it makes it very beautiful, and how diverse it is. And being able to recognize those differences and, you know, leverage a platform like Project Catalyst to bring those differences together to actually produce amazing outcomes in terms of collaboration, where we've seen a lot of amazing people come together, form teams, which are at the forefront of, you know, driving the ecosystem today. It's just been nothing short of amazing, and, you know, it's a learning experience every day, and hopefully people get again excited for the upcoming funding rounds as well.
And Jack, participation obviously is the ultimate objective of Intersect: contribution, participation. Can you maybe just expand a little bit more about some of the ways that community members and collaborators and contributors to the ecosystem can get directly involved in Intersect?
Yeah, that's a really good question. So we've got essentially two different tracks. One track is the governance conversation around what off-chain tools and processes and materials do we want to develop for Cardano to support and drive better outcomes on-chain. We know on-chain governance is coming next year, and so how does Intersect play a role in supporting and developing that? And then the other side of that, the other track, is doing the actual work, right? So we have these conversations, we have these debates and deliberations about what should the standards be, what should the features be, but who does it? And it's Intersect that facilitates, coordinates, orchestrates all of that distributed development among members. So members of Intersect will build and develop and contribute to the 25 or so code bases, and there'll probably be more code bases as we go. Yeah.
And I think part of that also, for example, has been the very practical application of moving, for example, the core code repos to a much more suitable environment for true open source collaboration and contribution as part of that.
Yeah, that's right. And we have the open source committee that's probably the most mature committee at Intersect already. They've met about 7 or 8 times. They've already agreed the open source principles and approach to the Cardano project. So that's super exciting already, you know, despite being only 12 weeks old. That's already been agreed by that committee. And in fact, there's a committee update tomorrow with Intersect members. So I encourage everyone, if you can, to come to a masterclass and listen from the committees themselves. But yes, some already really good progress there with the open source committee.
Yeah. Ben, zooming out a little bit, one of the things that you and I have been discussing, and I know one of the things that you're very keen to have some conversations while we're here in Dubai with lots of people who are here, is this idea of building slightly more formalized frameworks also around community building. And I think you've got a model that you're talking about that you want to kind of try and get people involved in.
Yeah, we want to share some of our frameworks. And as you say, you know, the ecosystem is zooming out. The edges are getting broader, you know, and it becomes harder to see everything that's going on, which is why it's more important to be able to engage in knowledge sharing, so we're not all paying the same cost to learn the same lessons. You know, we should be able to repeat successes. So as you say, you know, I want to start sharing some of the frameworks that we're experimenting with internally. One of them I've put up on Twitter is the HEART framework, which is product-led, that looks at happiness, engagement, adoption, retention, and task success. So we've taken that and we've customized it for community building. And the benefit of that is if you're a founder or you're a tech lead, right, and you've got people that aren't technical who want to contribute, well, now you can give them a framework that they can start contributing and measuring their community growth with. Or if you're in a project and you want to get better at not just doing good work, but getting your good work seen, then it's a framework that you can use to manage up. And so although this initial idea I've shared on Twitter, I want to have a discussion with different founders and people who are building communities so we can come to a consensus. Because the main goal is, could we have a shared framework and a shared understanding of what community building is? Because then we can learn from each other, right? And the final thread there is, because we did tweak a product-led framework, we can bring it back to product teams and then again have like a shared discussion around, well, how are you driving happiness in the product? And now I can talk to a product person in their language, and well, this is how we're doing it in the community. And so happiness and engagement and adoption is a product and a community discussion.
Now, Danny, obviously recently the IOG Catalyst team was awarded the operator status for the Catalyst Fund and also obviously put forward some quite interesting roadmap ideas. Maybe you can tell us a little bit more about what you see the vision for Catalyst as being and the ways that the community can get more involved in helping shape that vision at the same time.
Yeah, I think the primary positive outcome of the vote has been that is now clear accountability to a roadmap. I think historically it's been a little bit challenging, much as like as we operate or try to operate in a decentralized environment. It's like very challenging to find out who is working on what exactly, and I think this roadmap provides a clarity of direction, which also then brings an opportunity for that community-led experimentation and co-building and co-creating and really creating the agency in the process. Because now you understand, okay, what is the Catalyst team working on? What are the priorities for the next 12 months? And that brings really clarity of like, if I'm really engaged member, whether technically or otherwise capable also in terms of building communities, where do I fit in without, doubling down the work or, being more efficient? So now with that clarity, it just provides a much broader perspective on like where people can come in and how to engage in building and improving Project Catalyst at large. And I think that's the most exciting part, because just like as an Intersect and everybody else is working with the concept of the working groups, it's also something that we're seeking through to the lenses of the months upcoming to figure out how can we integrate the community feedback in a more meaningful way and in a way that really creates an agency. And it will be through the lenses of what working groups. So think about like how we've had the notion of the Catalyst Circle. How do we evolve that into the future? How do we create more, governance parameters inside the Project Catalyst so that people can, have now focus on different areas, like whether it's the parameters themselves, whether it's the dispute resolution, or other important elements which are difficult but important topics to engage with, and we want to do it with the community. So having the tighter collaboration and clarity of roles of like who is responsible for what, I think it brings a greater, platform for fruitful collaboration, hopefully.
And obviously you're here and sharing more about the upcoming Fund 11. Perhaps you can tell us more about that and also maybe touch on some of the elements of enhancement or improvement that you've kind of taken from community feedback and are building in.
Absolutely. So as you know, Fund 10 just barely concluded. We've onboarded 192 projects from more than 100 unique teams, which is really exciting. And we've just completed a project of onboarding, and that means that we can start looking forward to see when the Fund 11 may begin. So we just held a workshop with a full room of Catalyst community members. So shout out to everyone who was able to participate in a live session. But we were lucky enough to share the news that Fund 11 is to begin on November 15th. So mark your calendars. In about 2 weeks from now, we'll open the submission process for Fund 11, and there will be 50 million ADA available for funding. And this is a part of the 3-fund cycle that is expected throughout the next year, where in total we'll be allocating 150 million ADA through the community-led voting through all these different funds, 11, 12, and 13. So November 15th is when the Fund 11 will begin. There's also a number of changes we talked about. Obviously, there's lots of community feedback, as always, present in each of the funding rounds. So we've been keenly participating and running a series of workshops, partially run by the Project Catalyst team, but also by the community members, where we were sensing of like what are the opportunities for iteration. And I think one of the most meaningful changes will be how we approach the categorization. So allowing that, truly the mantra on the welcome to the experiment slide of like providing the safe and lively environment for, the highest potential of human collaboration is, creating a safe space for nascent ideas. So things like, distributing a product use cases category into concepts, solutions, and products with different levels, different thresholds, giving room basically for any project, any idea, having that space and be equally merited upon. And most importantly, we were also keenly looking into the voting dynamics. And I think one of the most striking changes that we're going to be testing and learning from, hopefully collectively, is also removing of the infamous downvoting function, which has served its security function in the past. But I think theory meets practice, and I think we've listened keenly to what the community had to say about it. We researched into it, and Fund 11 will be the first one where it will be just upvoting in that sense. So really excited to see how that plays out, and we're going to learn what we are going to learn from it.
So in terms of those categories, that's really about trying to ensure that whether you're an established builder who's got a serious track record, established massive levels of trust, or you're someone coming who's a bit newer into the ecosystem with maybe less of a big idea but an equal passion, there's a space at the table for everybody.
That's correct, and especially if that's the concept. Catalyst is really a grassroots innovation, and this is where we want to reorient the energy of people's participation. So obviously, ecosystem as a varied needs as such, and there's a wide variety of people participating. But it's very challenging to compete, when you are like a more established group or team versus an individual contributor, and that can be quite intimidating. So trying to steer back towards the ethos of the Catalyst of having that safe space for collaboration is really zoning in on the concept and the solution part where it's the fresh ideas coming in. You don't really have any product yet, and essentially you're able to test drive it and see how the community reacts, getting that early feedback before you graduate to the next stages, where you can ask for larger ticket sizes and not stomp on top of each other. Like small ideas, bigger ideas, like when they're meshed together, it's very difficult also to make sense as a voter, as a participant. How do you prioritize those? What is more important? What is less important? Where are my priorities as an individual member of Cardano ecosystem? Having those tracks basically gives clear framework of like how to make those decisions, hopefully a little bit more efficiently, and also for participants as proposers to find that space, where do I fit in?
And I think everybody will be very pleased that the downvoting got the downvote.
Only upwards now.
So. Jack, moving to you. Fred talked in his keynote at the beginning of the day around the nature of consent, which I think participation and consent are extremely closely linked. There's no point in involving yourself in something if you don't feel you can make an impact on it. Tell us a little bit more about how consent matters to Intersect, but also more widely to the wider Cardano community, and how Intersect is going to try and manage and drive that consent.
Yeah, so consent being, Intersect is a member-based organization, right? It's a not-for-profit. So we've already set ourselves out with the right attitude that this is for members, by the members. And I think when we look at consent implicitly and explicitly, we've been on the journey really since November 2022 when we released the first version of SIP 1694. And since then, it's gone through 5 or 6 different iterations based on community feedback through the global workshops that were held in the spring and the summer. And also, it's the most active SIP in the history of the Cardano improvement process. And so consent has been sort of implicitly gathered across the year. It's nearly a year now. And then we need some explicit markers as well, right? So we need to take those temperature checks. Is the progress made so far good? Do we want to continue to do that? And so next week we'll be announcing a bit more details on a Cardano ballot. So you'll be able to participate in a temperature check on signaling the intention to continue with the progress made on the SIP, ultimately with the SBOs voting to upgrade to Voltaire, essentially, to bring on-chain decision-making later next year. So it's really exciting. And Intersect is, that's on-chain. Intersect is going to play a role in all of the, as I mentioned, all of the off-chain elements. So how do we decide and deliberate on, or recommend? But Intersect is a recommending body primarily because it needs consent on-chain. So to be able to enact anything that Intersect recommends, we need that consent from general ADA holders. And this is the amazing relationship that we're going to find evolve over next year. And I think when you couple on-chain decision-making with institutions like Intersect, we're now pioneering a space that's not been done. It's not been done before. There's no chain quite set up like Cardano. So I'm really optimistic. I think the growth of Cardano is going to be exponential in terms of builders, in terms of projects, and I'm very excited for next year.
And I think you've answered my last question, so I'll move straight back to Danny. Danny, in the age of Voltaire, what are your hopes for Cardano and its community over the year and the years ahead?
I hope the agency is going to get better and better over time. I think it was one of the first elements that has, really attracted me to Cardano in my early stage. Like when I read the idea about Voltaire and how you can actually have meaningful conversations and then iterate, on chain and decisions as an ecosystem in a decentralized and a distributed way. Like that really caught my attention, and you can see that like good things really take time to build and then think through. And I'm pretty sure there's going to be a lot of challenges still ahead of us, but this ecosystem is so resilient, so smart. There's so many amazing people, individual companies and organizations that I think collectively we're going to make some really good strides as Cardano through the Voltaire. So I can't wait for that to take place. And it will be a first step on a long journey, right? It's not the end. It's the start of a new beginning, and we're going to have to deal with the future when that comes.
Ben, how about you?
I mean, when there's greater participation with the decisions and greater participation in that innovation engine and people have funding, what I'm excited about is arming people and giving them tools through a peer-reviewed playbook of community building tactics, and we're also looking at ecosystem maps that separate the material and the information and knowledge exchange. I'd love to be publishing those in 2024 so that that perspective that we talked about that's getting broader as the ecosystem grows exponentially is easier to navigate and see what's going on, and then also giving people the frameworks to measure growth and to think about community building with the HEART framework, these kind of things. So arming and tooling people once the decisions and the funding is in place from all that participation that we've talked about.
Brilliant. Just before we close, maybe let's just go along the line. A quick call to action, Jack. What have you got for us?
Very simple one, Tim. You can join as a founding member today of Intersect. I think probably a few of you in the room are. I can spot some faces of committee members in the audience already. But come to see me at the booth. We can chat more about what it all means and how it's going to do its thing. And just come to the booth.
Yeah, so if you would like to, if you have never heard about Project Catalyst or you haven't had an opportunity to dive in, projectcatalyst.io is an amazing resource where you can start, diving into like what that is all about. But also myself and Chris Baird, we're here as members of our Project Catalyst team, so we are at the IOG booth here as well. So come and tap us by shoulder, give a chat. We'll be happy more than to discuss anything that's on your mind. And equally so, tomorrow we're going to have another workshop. We're going to dive deeper into what we discussed today and some of the announcements that we've shared. So if you're interested in Project Catalyst, join us here, or if you're listening or watching this live, projectcatalyst.io soon should have, maybe even today, a blog post that basically outlines briefly the road for Fund 11. So you're more than welcome to come and build.
Yeah, my Twitter DM's always open on Ben O'Hanlon. We have 11,000 people in our Discord. We're going to be revamping that in 2024 too. So if you're someone that's building communities, or you're a founder and a tech lead with people that want to contribute to your project, but you don't really know what guidance to give them, then send them my way. I want to build a community of community builders within that Discord that touches on all the things that we talked about. So just come and talk to me or
Great.
DM me.
And my closing call to action is let's keep building, let's keep participating, and let's keep making Cardano more of what it already is. Thank you very much, everybody.
Thank you. Thank you.
Thanks, guys.